I call the Dupont City Council meeting for November 13th, 2012 to order at 7:04 p.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Coffey.
Here.
Councilmember Quartz.
Here.
Councilmember Ehrenreich.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan. Here. Councilmember Trotter is out of town on business. A motion.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Wilcox, seconded by Councilmember Quartz. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. 6-0.
Councilmember Westman.
Here.
Councilmember Wilcox.
Here.
Police Chief Ron Goodpaster.
Here.
Interim Finance Director Steve Marcotte.
Here.
Fire Chief Greg Hull.
Here.
Planning Manager Bill Kingman.
Here.
City Administrator Don Masco.
Here.
Public Works Director Peter Zahn.
Here.
City Attorney Bob Sturbank.
Here.
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. The first thing on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. And I would like to add that two proclamations after approval of the agenda be read in honor of the Steilacoom High School cross-country teams. Are there any other changes to the agenda? If not, a motion would be in order. Motion's been made by Councilmember Coffey, seconded by Councilmember Wilcox. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. And this is the proclamation I'd like to initiate. And Mayor Lucas, would you please come join me up front? Thank you. So we haven't done this before, but I figured, we're the mayors, so we can break new ground. And we have several students in our community that have just done exceptional things. And we have tonight with us several students from within the Steilacoom School District that have done great things on the cross-country track. And what we've asked to do is we've invited the Steilacoom High School cross-country team to join us tonight. And first, I'd like to recognize the coaches for Steilacoom High School cross-country, Jenny Lang and Mike Henderson. Would you please stand? Will you please give them a round of applause? So we have two proclamations that are honoring their teams, both the boys team and the girls cross-country team for their achievements. And I'm going to read the proclamation for the girls team, and Mayor Lucas from the town of Steilacoom is going to read the proclamation for the boys team. Whereas the Steilacoom High School girls cross-country team athletes have proven to be role models to the members of our community by demonstrating industriousness, friendship, loyalty, cooperation, and enthusiasm for their sport. And whereas this year the team expanded from 8 to 18 girls, and all 18 athletes showed sincerity, adaptability, reliability, resourcefulness, and integrity throughout the season. And whereas the varsity athletes of the girls cross-country team all achieved academic excellence by maintaining a 3.5 GPA or greater. And whereas the team's self-discipline, ambition, intentness, and hard work paid off when they placed second as a team at the sub-district league meet, allowing them to proceed to postseason competition. And whereas the team's excellent conditioning, skill, and team spirit shone forth when they captured second place at the WIA Westside Classic District 3 Championships. Their competitiveness and patience earned them a trip to the WIA 2A State Cross-Country Meet, the first time the team's gone since 2001. And whereas the Steilacoom High School team showed great poise and confidence at the state meet, demonstrating superior sportsmanship and great respect for other competitors, and were a remarkable representation of our community. Now, therefore, we, Michael Graham, Mayor of the City of DuPont, and Ron Lucas, Mayor of the Town of Steilacoom, do hereby proclaim that the highest honor and recognition is hereby bestowed upon the Steilacoom High School girls cross-country team and their coaches for all they have sacrificed and the hard work that they have committed themselves to in order to compete at the state cross-country meet for 2012. Thank you, runners, for making an impact on our community and being great ambassadors to the region and to the state. Please join me in a round of applause.
I'm going to do the abbreviated version of all this. But can I have the two coaches stand up? Thanks, Mike. Thanks so very much. Obviously, the backbone for the communities of Steilacoom and Dupont is the school district. And it is adults such as these two that compel students to come out and be part of really positive activities, both as citizens and as athletes. In this case, in my abbreviated, the gentlemen also have a 3.5 grade point average or higher. That's what I'm looking for besides the citizenship. And I know since they receive a lot of our taxpayer money, that they continually are amazing in what they do academically as young people growing up and here in sports. So I'm going to represent Mr. Allen and Mr. Wingfield, who finished 6th and 8th at the district meet and competed also in the WIAA state cross-country meet in Pasco, Washington. And to abbreviate this, again, Michael called me about this and we said, this is really a good idea. It's not that they haven't had other successes both at Pioneer and at the high school in the past, but this is a unique group that came out and then decided to stick with it. And cross country isn't one that always gets your heart revved up as something, let me go and run and continue to run, rain, sleet, or snow. And so for these young people, both the ladies team and the gentleman team, would you kindly, all of you that are here from the team, stand so we can give you another round of applause, then we're going to ask you to come on up and give you the certificates. Thanks. Can I have the boys first? We'll get them over on this side. Mike, if you can also come here because there's something for you as the senior adult in all this. Thank you so very much. Thank you. And one for each one. Now, since this is all part of growing up, can you introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about what you did with running?
My name is Sebastian Wingfield. It's my second year running cross country, and it's really, really fun.
My name is Hezekiah. You guys can call me Hezzy, though. This is my third year doing cross country, and yeah, it's not always been easy, but it's been pretty fun so far, and it's great to be here with this guy right here and this guy. So, yeah, thank you all. And right.
Hi, I'm Coach Mike Henderson. These two young guys, Sebastian's a senior, Hezzy's a junior, put forth a lot of work this year. They do more than just run. They're good students and good community members. So we're really proud of them. They went to state and ran really hard, and both of them were on the first team in the boys league, and it's not a give me league. You got to get out there and move quickly. So we want to thank the support from both Mayor Lucas and Mayor Grimm for recognizing these fine athletes.
Ladies.
Thanks, guys. Amanda Janes, Rory Fortman, Jamie Staldler, Adele Tiggin, Reagan, Nikki, Sophie. Please come up, and I think it's a great idea what Mayor Lucas did. So if you could just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your role.
I'm Sophia Kingsley, and running cross country was really fun, mostly because of our coach.
Okay. I'm Rory, and cross country was really fun, except for hill repeats, which weren't so fun.
I'm Reagan, and I'm Adele. I'm a foreign exchange student from Germany, and I just want to say thank you again to my coach because it was the best season ever I had in cross country.
I'm Nikki Hobbs, and this is my third year in cross country, and this is the greatest girls team that I have been on in the 3 years, much to the dedication of our lovely coach here. So thank you.
Actually, this year has been quite the privilege. There's 7 girls on the varsity athletic or cross country team. We're missing 2 of them because of the college. There's a college fair. Darn it, they want to go to college. But at any rate, these girls, they were able to qualify as a team, which I don't know if any of you know about the scoring on a team, but they shocked us 2 times. So they pretty much gave me heart failure at sub-districts, and they got second. We were expected to probably get 5th or 6th, and they take the top 7. So we thought maybe we'd get in. And then at districts, they just bonded together like a big group of sisters, and they just were amazing. They amazed me, and they truly do make an impact on me. And I'm so proud of them. They've just done a just remarkable job, and both Steilacoom and Dupont need to be so proud of these women for the representation. And to be a student athlete is a difficult thing, and they're a bunch of smarties. So anyway, not only can they run fast, but they are super smart. And then as far as Reagan Bernardoni, I can tell you, she's one of our freshmen. She came out and had a stellar season, and now most of them are also like dual athletes. So Rory Fortman, she's in the middle of a soccer season too, and we've got a wrestler, we've got basketball players. So now from cross country, they have the strong base that they need to excel in other sports as well. So I'm proud of them all. They did a great job.
Thanks again to all the athletes and the coaches. And just as you're going through and shaking hands, we really want to reinforce that the whole community is proud of you, from the citizens that are here in the audience, the citizens that are watching at home, everyone in the school district, and all of these councils. So thank you very much for what you do in representing our community, and congratulations on your success. Next up on the agenda is public comments. This is the first of 2 opportunities for public comments. You can come talk about anything that's on your mind. If you want to speak specifically to budget issues, we will have a public hearing on the 2013 proposed budget, and that is next up on the agenda. But feel free, this is the first of 2 opportunities to come forward and address any issue. Just first come, first serve. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Elitza Healy, 1871 Ridgeview Drive. I think it's actually fitting that I'll get to follow this wonderful cross-country team, because there's another congratulations that I think we owe to the citizens of Dupont, and that is for the great voter turnout at the recent election. There are 3 points from this recent election that I think are important to make, but the first one is currently there's been at least 83% voter turnout based on the latest numbers. The citizens of Dupont participated in this election. They exercised their civic duty, and I think that was a great win for the democratic process. I know that over the course of the election, over a dozen editorials were published. People participated in the city-sponsored neighborhood meetings, but I think the conversations happened also over social media, emails between neighbors, over the kitchen table. I know that I personally talked to well over 200 people over the course of this campaign, and I know that some of those people cast their ballots from Afghanistan as they're currently deployed. And if there's one thing that deserves another round of applause, it's all those veterans, as this meeting comes on the heels of Veterans Day for the people who serve in the military. The second point from this election is that we have the results. The election hasn't been certified yet, but the overwhelming majority of the citizens of DuPont rejected DuPont Prop 1. And this is the part where I think we need to take an important lesson as important decisions will be made going forward. We have 7 council members, and council members, you are our elected representatives. 6 of you voted to put this proposition on the ballot. You gave us your reasoning why you thought it was a good idea. And to me, from this election, it is apparent that you don't have the pulse of the city. If we had gone by the 6-to-1 council vote, we would have expected support for DuPont Prop 1 by a majority of the citizens. Instead, we have the opposite. An overwhelming majority voted to reject Prop 1. So I would hope that going forward, council members respect the vote of the citizens, as you are our elected representatives, and your votes and your decisions have to respect the vote of the citizens. And the third point I'd like to make, which kind of relates to the budget discussions that will be taking place, is the following. As I mentioned, I spoke to, in person and over email, to well over 200 people over the course of this campaign. And, I'm sorry?
I was trying to subtly tell you to wrap it up, but never mind.
Well, out loud is better, for the record. But there's 2 main reasons why this proposition failed. Number 1, people are outraged at the $21.7 million price tag for the Civic Center. And number 2, the solution that was put forth before the citizens. There is an important group of stakeholders that were conspicuously absent to this point, and those stakeholders are the investors who own this building. We lease it from them. The lease rate is $1.27 million a year. You're going to need to decide going forward, can we afford this lease rate? Is it worth to prioritize before the job of our police officers? That's the comment I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional public comments? Again, this is the first of 2 opportunities. You don't have to come up all at once.
Mike Gorski, 1875 Ridgeview Drive. I've signed in on the other sheet. To expand on what Mrs. Healy just said, there's a defeat in the levy proposal. This is not a time for a touchdown dance celebration in the end zone. This is the time you really have to start get busy and roll up your sleeves and come up with a solution. You try to make it about fire service and services. Make no mistake, it is about this building, and it is about the burden of placing this building in the general fund. The citizens have to realize that our funding crisis is because we went from basically having a 0% to 100% obligation as taxpayers because REIT failed. That decision has failed us. We went from having $0 coming from citizens' pocketbooks because of REIT to going to over $40 million once the term of this leaseback deal is finished. Going from 0 to 100% is something I think the citizens did not fully understand until they got the ballot. To throw public safety on there, I feel, has been cynical all along. You had an opportunity to do something about the Safer Grant firemen when you hired them in 2010, I believe. And every one of you, save for Councilman Quartz and Councilman Jordan, were part of this legislative body who had an opportunity to find funding to keep these men employed, but you failed them and you failed the citizens. You need to own that responsibility. And if we have to make more cuts, if you want to make this about the cuts, I caution you that, again, consider that it is the building that put us in this predicament. And this legislative body has placed us in this predicament. The citizens gave you a very clear message, and whether or not you act on it in an appropriate manner is to be seen, but everyone is watching. And for those of you who wanted to make it about Mike Gorski being on the opposition of this, the latest vote count has 2,016 other Mike Gorskis out there. It's not about me. It never was. It was about this building. And if you want to make it about public safety, I just urge you use caution.
Thank you for your comments. Additional public comments? Okay. Next up, we have a presentation on the agenda regarding the Sequatchie Creek Edmonds Marsh restoration planning effort. Would the representatives from Cal Portland please come forward?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council, citizens, staff. I'm Pete Stoltz from Cal Portland. I thought maybe it might be helpful if I gave you a little recap of where we are to date with the Sequatchie Creek planning process, restoration planning process. Back in July 18th, we had a visioning meeting. That's really a process with a core group of stakeholders to try to identify the process going forward with which we could develop the plan. Then we had a broader stakeholder group meeting on August 14th, and that was a meeting to get input from the stakeholders, provide information to stakeholders about what we were trying to accomplish with the planning process, and identify and take their input, and that we could go into the rest of it. So September 6th, we had the first core group meeting, and started to identify, started to talk through the elements in the restoration plan. And just to remind you, those elements include raising Sequatchie Lake to achieve a grade of flow down towards the creek, removal of fill in Edmund Marsh that potentially impedes flow, restoring gradients through Bell and Hamer marshes, and managing beavers. November 1st, there was another core group meeting. Based on the September 6th meeting, of course, we went away. South Puget Sound Group did quite a bit of work looking at various different things like, can we do something with the sewer line under Robinson Trail? What information is available regarding water quality in Hamer Marsh, those types of issues. November 1st, we had another core group meeting, and that was really to get into these details a little bit more. So the group created three packages of restoration options, kind of a gold, silver, and bronze version to kind of create a way to narrow down some of these things. And it really kind of varied from a realm of, very expensive to not so expensive, or more accurately, actually, more capital intensive to more maintenance intensive. Things like the likelihood that they would be implemented, the potential to, replace Sequatchie Creek springs that the JBLM gets their water from with wells is a low likelihood of implementation, but it's in the gold package. So what? So what has all this accomplished? Well, there are a few things that we have decided and that we do have consensus on. With regard to improving gradients, we know that we absolutely cannot do anything that's going to put JBLM's water wells or their mission at risk. They've made that very clear, and so it's going to take some very comprehensive studies to do some of those options that we've looked at in order to satisfy them that that's not going to create problems. So that's kind of going to be more of a longer term approach. A project that improves salmon habitat and can bring salmon into the creek is more likely to be something that they're able to get funding for, get interest in, and so that's something that we're taking away. With regard to Bell and Hamer marshes, one of the elements in the restoration plan was to create gradients in Bell and Hamer McKay marshes and bring that water into Edmund Marsh. A number of the members have expressed some concerns about water quality coming into Hamer Marsh and been concerned about putting that directly into Edmonds. We're doing some water quality sampling to determine whether or not that is really an issue, whether that can be treated. There's also some ideas about maybe we can increase the capacity of water that's held in the marsh and basically provide longer-term flow throughout the summer. So that information's ongoing. We've also, one of the big things that people have talked about is, Robinson Trail crosses the Edmund Marsh, and there's a sewer line under there. And what we didn't know before was whether or not we could do anything without sewer line, whether if that sewer line was made deeper, would it require, would it be a forced main and require a pump, which would virtually make it impossible. Well, we've understood that can still be a gravity flow and could be installed a bit deeper. It's not cheap, it's not easy, but it is an option. So next core group meeting is going to be December 10th or 17th. That date hasn't been set yet. It'll be to discuss the modifications to the dry reach out here to help keep the flow once it's going, keep the water on the surface rather than infiltrating, and the potential use of pumped water from the gravel mine if that goes forward, and follow up on these previous elements. Based on the conversation from the last meeting, I think we're gonna need at least another core group meeting, probably a couple more, but I think we are, whittling away at these issues. We've got the right folks coming to the meetings, and I think I'm feeling pretty good about it right now. So if you have any questions.
Thanks, Pete. Any questions from council? Councilmember Quartz, then Councilmember Westman.
Yeah, hey, Pete, I took your invitation and went to the last meeting, and I was impressed by the technical expertise of the people sitting around the table. So I won't comment on any of that capability, but I noticed something that disappointed me. If you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. And I got to tell you, a group that develops courses of action without an objective is wasting a lot of time. You have not established an objective. You've talked about elements that are critical, whether it's gradient, whether it's how many cubic feet per second are at the mouth of the creek in the peak of summer, to what kind of fish can go up, and these are beyond my scope of expertise, but what I can tell you is that unless you're working towards a common objective, it really doesn't matter what course of action you develop. Quite honestly, you had a JBLM representative there that said that the leadership on JBLM is unaware that this is ongoing. As somebody who has worked directly in that funding process, if the garrison commander and the commanding general don't have intimate knowledge of the fact that we're talking about something that will impact drinking water and mission on JBLM, then this is just some sort of drama we're doing for entertaining people. I'm going to ask the mayor, in your capacity, I think you've got to engage Colonel Hodges as the garrison commander, because I don't get the feeling, or I know the JBLM representative made it clear that the garrison commander had no knowledge of this action. Now, if he's uninformed, that's too bad, but we can't deal with people that are not in a position of authority. I would like to see what the objectives of any restoration are, and I'd like to see the stakeholders that are here, that have been here for this entire process, that get some comment on that objectives. Then come to us with courses of action that can actually achieve that objective. Your 3 courses of action had 3 completely different outcomes. If you don't know what outcome you're trying to achieve, how can you develop a course of action?
Well, I definitely appreciate that, Councilmember Quartz. I mean, we had an objective at one point to improve flows in Sequalter Creek, and we actually came up with a pretty good solution, I thought. It was called North Sequalter Creek. Now, that one wasn't very popular.
Yeah, but you talked about a wide range of each one of these courses of action, the gold, silver, and bronze, had wide ranges of outcomes. And, well, there's 2 ways of looking at it. Gold must be better than bronze. It costs more, so that's really neat. But if our agreed objective can be satisfied by bronze, then why are we talking about something in a magnitude of 10 times as much? it's a question, what do the people who are stakeholders in this want to achieve? And your plans, you know, the technical expertise you have in the room is fantastic. But if it's not targeted against objectives, and my feeling is step one would have been agree on attainable objectives, bring them back to this body and the other stakeholders. Yes, are we satisfied that these outcomes are what we want? Then the follow-up would have been, here are 1, 2, 3 proposals to achieve those. And obviously they all come with different price tags and different compromises. But right now your objectives are going in 3 different directions. And they don't get to the same thing. And when you listen to your group at the table, they have different ideas about what the desired outcome is. So I'm not sure we're focusing the expertise. And the other piece that I have some question about is the test mine plan. I understood that it was time for that. So the test mines you're going to drill to look at the impact on the aquifer. I understood that plan was supposed to be available now.
No, the plan for mine dewatering, none of that work would really happen until we've got the permitting in place, so that we've identified what those objectives are and how that would all what we were going to run that test against.
And will when that is before any testing starts, will this group get the opportunity to vet the objectives of the test?
The city will through their regulatory process, certainly. And this group will have an opportunity to vet the restoration plan, and the restoration plan has to go forward before before we can even put in an application for mining in the south parcel.
Well, I think there's got to be some more specificity and objectives, and then your courses of action would be better served if they, 3 different ways to achieve this set of outcomes that we've agreed upon would be a more desirable approach.
I'd be happy to talk to you about objectives and get some clarification on what your thoughts are and any suggestions you have, because that's always a challenge with something like this. Is the key is achievable objectives, and that's what we're really trying to accomplish and determine what that is with this broad group. And with regard to communication at the base, I think our group can definitely use some help with that. I know South Puget Sound Group has had meetings with several different people on the base, and I don't believe that it's something that nobody's aware of, but certainly we would love to be able to discuss it in more detail with higher level people at JBLM.
Mr. Mayor, I'd recommend that at our level we can engage the base to make sure that the appropriate authorities are aware of it, because any plan that involves JBLM will eventually, at a minimum, be approved by the garrison commander, most likely up through IMCOM West, and big money will go all the way to Department of the Army.
Additional questions?
I'm good.
Councilmember Westman.
Thank you very much for your status report this evening. Last week, staff and council received an email communication from Don Russell, who has been attending all of the meetings that you mentioned. He put on an attachment entitled "The Power of a Common Shared Vision." In that attachment, he shared 3 differing visions on the location of the Vashon Aquifer dewatering channel. He indicated that an impasse in arriving at a common shared vision seems to exist. Could you explain the status or direction for reconciling these visions having to do with the location of the Vashon Aquifer dewatering channel?
The dewatering channel, I'm afraid exactly what you're talking about. Are you talking about the proposed mine?
He indicated here the Environmental Caucus and the Nisqually Tribe and the Washington Department of Fisheries and Wildlife envision restoration of the coho salmon habitat in Sequatchie Creek and the Edmund Marsh. Cal Portland envisioned obtaining a gravel mining permit that allowed dewatering of the Vashon Aquifer so that to access millions of tons of the currently groundwater saturated gravel located in the south parcel. The third vision is the citizens of the city of Dupont and visitors envision a flowing and access to Quality Creek and Edmund Marsh where salmon, birds, and native wildlife and marsh vegetation can be viewed and enjoyed. So far, these competing visions have not been reconciled into a common shared vision. And I'm just asking, what is the process for going forward in order to develop that common shared vision?
Well, I think the settlement agreement was one big step in developing a shared vision with a number of stakeholders, but obviously not everybody who's interested.
Right.
And then I think that, you know, there is our regulatory permit process that involves detailed SEPA review, which we'll have to do that again as part of this process, both for the mine, proposed South Parcel mine and dewatering project, and for the restoration project. And at the end, you know, that mitigation and restoration has to be in place. And we've got a lot of laws in place that require, you know, no net loss of habitat. That means that really we've got to improve the flow in Sequatchie Creek if there's a way for this. You know, I don't see any way that the project and the mine goes forward unless we've got some pretty darn certain understanding that there's going to be an improvement in flow in Sequatchie Creek, personally. But we'll have to go through a whole SEPA process and analysis and permit process as part of that. And, you know, I don't necessarily think that those visions cannot occur together. And that's why we have the SEPA process. So that's, you know, that's the thing that says, well, how do we, you know, when we have competing interests of how do we get traffic flow and how do we preserve habitat and how do we get wood and how do we preserve, you know, trees and all those types of things. That's why we have our permit process, and we'll be going through that full on, and that's the way it'll go.
Thank you for the explanation.
Additional council questions? Okay, thanks, Pete. Oh,
thank you.
Councilmember Coffey has one question.
Well, it's more directed towards the city administrator. Can you kind of give us an idea as to who you have met with in the past on JBLM? I thought there were some attorneys involved, and you know, I know we have a new garrison commander, so perhaps.
Right, and the previous garrison commander had been aware of what was going on. I'm not sure if the general had ever been engaged before, but we had met with the public works directors. We've met with legal counsel at JBLM, and again, the garrison commander previously. So I don't know. I could defer to the city attorney as to whether the new garrison commander has been informed or briefed. I'm not sure.
And I don't have any information about the garrison commander's involvement. I do know that we, as Ms. Masco referenced, we had spoken previously with the base's environmental compliance attorney, who's the person who would advise the base on whether the actions that might be discussed as part of the restoration plan were those that they could take in compliance with federal environmental regulations. And so they had involvement at that point, and I think there was also a base staff person involved in environmental regulatory issues, a non-lawyer who was also involved, but I can't speak to the current garrison commander's awareness.
Okay, so there are records then of the involvement of the higher ups than the staff people that are sitting at the tables in the past.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I certainly know there are emails amongst the some of the individual reflecting communications with the individuals I was just discussing.
Okay.
Higher than those individuals, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Additional council comments, questions? Next up on the agenda is the public hearing. We have two public hearings scheduled tonight. The first is on the 2013 revenue, and the second is on the 2013 budget. I'll call on Steve Marcotte for the staff presentation on 2013 revenue. Details.
Good evening, Mayor Graham, members of City Council. I'm Steve Marcotte again, your interim finance director, and I'll be presenting just a brief overview of the city's proposed revenues prior to you opening it for public comment. First slide, please. This graph shows a history of the city's assessed valuation, the levy rate, and the actual property tax levies for the last few years, showing the pretty rapid growth in the city's assessed valuation and a more recent decline caused by the recession and the decline in the housing and other property markets. There's also, you can see your history of your property tax rates, including the proposed rate that we'll be presenting later tonight. And then the current assessed value, the current proposed levy of $1,444,059. This chart on the next slide, please, Aaron. This is a graph of that, depicting that history. And again, it certainly illustrates a very steep growth. Dupont has experienced a growth that very few cities in the area have experienced. But again, as I mentioned a moment ago, that total assessed valuation has declined somewhat over the last several years. Okay, next slide, please. This slide depicts the value of new construction that has been added to the city's tax rolls each year over quite a period of time. The significance of this particular slide is both to show the significance of the kind of growth that has occurred here, but also to show its annual impact in terms of revenues to the city's general fund. The way property taxes work for a regular levy is that we are capped at an annual growth in the regular levy of 1%, but any taxes resulting from new construction is added on top of that. So these things translate to real current benefit to city services. Next slide, please. This is the actual calculation of the city's property tax, proposed property tax levy for this year, and it would be all I could do to explain it. The way that it begins is from the last year's highest levy, or actual levy, and then the 1% caps are added to that, and that's, I don't think, well understood. The assessed valuation declines don't necessarily have a direct impact on the revenues that can be derived from a regular property tax levy. You'll see a difference when we get to the EMS levy, where it does have a significant impact. So we get the 1% cap. We add the new construction. There's a number the county assessor gives us for administrative refunds, which also adds to it. That amount varies from tiny amounts last year to a little bit larger this year. And that equals the total amount of your levy. And you take your proposed levy and you divide it by your assessed valuation in terms of per thousand, and that's how you derive the expected property tax rate for next year, which would be basically $1.21 per thousand. Next slide, please, Aaron. This slide, good. my hard copy, we hadn't changed it from 11 to 12 at the top, so I'm glad to see that got caught. This is a depiction of the 2012 property tax rates for all of the cities in Pierce County. DuPont is in green. And the significance of this chart, in my mind, is that it shows DuPont has one of the lowest property tax rates in Pierce County. But this particular view can create a somewhat distorted view of your total property tax impact, because some cities provide fire and EMS services directly out of their general fund, but other cities are part of a fire district, and the district levies EMS levies and a regular property tax levy of its own to provide those services. So moving on to the next slide, what we see here is the impact of that change. When you factor in the cost of both the city services, city tax rate, and any fire district, both its regular and its EMS levy, we see a real shift among the positions. Sumner was our lowest property tax rate before you make that adjustment, and it's not as low afterwards, for example. But when in both perspectives, DuPont remains, in this viewpoint, the lowest property tax rate in Pierce County. Okay, moving on. This is another depiction of trying to illustrate the overlapping nature of property taxes. When the public pays their property tax, they pay it from one wallet, purse, wherever they get their dollars, but it's levied by a bunch of jurisdictions. And it's, I think, often hard to understand who gets what, and there's often a presumption that the city gets the most. This illustrates more of the reality. The city of DuPont, for every dollar in 2012 that was paid in property tax in DuPont, 10 cents went to city general fund. An additional 4 cents was derived from the emergency medical services levy, which also went to help fund fire and emergency services. So we're talking a total out of $1, 14 cents being levied and spent by the city on its services, and the other 86 cents being levied by somebody else for other purposes. The largest amount, and this is typical of every community, the largest amount is typically levied by the school district. The other ones, the Pierce County levy, the State of Washington levy, those will equally impact every city in Pierce County. Some cities are in the library districts, some are not. But also, I think all the cities except Eatonville are in the Port of Tacoma's district and receive that amount. So that's a depiction of who got what share of every dollar in property tax that was paid. Now moving on to the actual proposed levies. The top amounts show the rates. The regular property tax rate of being proposed at $1.21, I'll round, per thousand, and an EMS, emergency medical services levy at 50 cents per thousand. The 50 cents per thousand is the maximum rate allowed by the vote that the city had to impose the EMS levy. When you translate those rates into dollars, as illustrated before, The regular ad valorem tax proposal, which is the 1% plus new construction plus adjustments, is the $1,444,059. The EMS levy, and I meant to write this, is $587,469. That amount is actually less than last year's EMS levy. And that's because of the decline in the assessed valuation. If all things remained the same and the assessed valuation dropped by the amount it did, then the EMS levy would result in a tax of 52 cents per thousand, which is above the maximum permitted of 50 cents. So the only way you can adjust for that is to cause the actual dollar amounts collected to decline. Yes, Councilmember.
Councilmember Ehrenreich. Yeah. So what is the cap for the regular levy cities face?
The cap is the 1% growth annually. There's not a rate cap.
I think it's $3.60.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't understand your question. and if you'd gone back to several slides ago, several cities are up that 360 cap. There are. Pardon me for not understanding the question, but yes, that's the maximum that can be levied. There are also several other tests for property taxes in the various jurisdictions that also kick in above that amount. And then we'll move on to this is a comparison of last year's and this year's proposed regular and EMS levies in terms of its impact on a theoretical $300,000 piece of property. See, last year the regular levy would have cost that property owner $373, and another $150 for the EMS levy. This year's proposal would cost that same property owner $362, plus again another $150 for the EMS levy, for about a $9 increase between the 2 years. And with that, I think it'd be appropriate to turn the hearing over to public comment.
Thank you. So I will now open the public hearing at 7:59 p.m. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on the 2013 revenues? That's the topic of this public hearing specifically. If so, please come forward.
My name is Don Dresser, 1437 Huron Court. A little tall on the tall side here, so I got to swing it up. I hear lots about the rates, and I'm going to give you a corporate perspective.
Don.
One of the things is how much, because every city isn't the same as far as the amount of revenue it generates from a given rate. So I'd like to see some comparisons with like cities and the amount of money that they generate. So if you have another town, because our rates here, our land value here, property value, is quite high compared to some other small city that's about our size, a little bigger, maybe a little smaller. And so their rates, in order to generate the same amount of revenue, would have to be higher. So I'd like to see some kind of analysis on that. I think your first priority needs to be fire and police. And Next time you do a SAFER grant, I hope you start the process at the beginning so you don't get down to the last date here and wondering how we're going to continue with this thing. There are, I think you need to do a review, and I think you've started on it, is what kind of taxes you collect. I've heard a lot about the I think it's called a removal tax, which has to do with gravel and logging. I think it's set at 1% currently, and could be raised to 2%. I don't think that affects most businesses here, other than maybe the gravel mine. I think most of the, I don't think there's anybody doing any big logging here. So I hope that you prioritize what you need to do and do it in a logical, efficient way, and provide feedback from the public and with your findings. And I hope we can do this in a civil way and not be at loggerheads with each other, because it doesn't benefit anybody. I think the staff that you have here would be very supportive of whatever you come up with to help you get down the road. But in order to get down the road, you're going to need the support of the community. And but I think the top priority has to go with fire and police. And yeah, department heads will, every year they'll come to you and they'll say, hey, I need this, this, and this, and you got to sit down with them and say, what do you really need? And because sometimes they will ask for the moon, but we have some staffing problems here, and that's got to be taken care of. And different communities handle it different ways. And I haven't really looked at cost comparisons for a couple of years now. The last cost comparisons I did was with the town of Suquamish, because it was another Weyerhaeuser development. And they had a fire department, and they had a police department. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dresser. Any additional public comments regarding the 2013 revenues for which this is the public hearing on? Just to remind folks, next up is the 2013 budget, and we'll have a public hearing on that next. You'll be first in line, Ray.
You just combined them together.
I will close this public hearing at 8:04 p.m. Next is the public hearing on the 2013 preliminary budget. And I'll start off with some opening comments, and then I'll call on Steve to give a presentation to the rest of us here. As many of you may recall, on October 9th, I proposed two budgets. It was Budget A and Budget B. Budget A, as you may remember, was based on the passage of Proposition 1, the temporary property tax measure to maintain our city's current level of public safety services, preserve 3 firefighter positions currently funded by a SAFER grant, and to meet the city's financial obligations to pay the debt service on the police station, the fire station, and the city hall facilities, which commenced construction in 2007. Budget B was the alternate proposal prepared in case the temporary property tax measure did not pass, which it didn't. So therefore, tonight's hearing is on proposed Budget B. As we dive into the details of this, I first want to highlight a couple of the things that the city has implemented, some actions that we've taken in 2012. This year, we've reduced salaries and froze automatic step increases in order to reform personnel performance policies and procedures for exempt staff. We've applied for a new SAFER grant to retain 3 firefighter positions that are currently funded through the federal grant that will expire in March 2013. We initiated an independent audit of business and occupation taxes to ensure compliance with existing code requirements. We've proposed business license reforms and the creation of a fee on rental properties to offset further reductions to public safety services, as well as fund a position to strengthen economic development by expediting permitting processes for new development. We've researched and conferred with legal counsel about renegotiating the debt service obligations for the police station, the fire station, and the city hall, which would require the unanimous consent of every holder that currently holds the certificates of participation for the approximate $18 million of original debt. We've researched and conferred with legal counsel regarding the cost of issuing a bond to provide a long-term, stable source of funding for the city's outstanding debt, which would exceed our current debt limit and cost taxpayers an additional approximate $1.5 to $2 million if we rebond before 2019. The matter of fact is, without additional revenue, it is not possible for us to meet our financial obligations, maintain current levels of public safety service, and rebalance the budget without reductions to our police and fire operations, which account for half of the city's general fund. Budget B is based on input from several community meetings that we've had, both public meetings here in the council chambers and throughout in the community. Budget B proposes the following: reduce irrigation and maintenance to parks, greenways, and facilities. Eliminate the True Green contract for greenway maintenance of Wilmington Drive and other greenways. Eliminate the True Green maintenance contract for Powderworks Park. Eliminate the maintenance of soccer and baseball fields at Powderwork Park. Close the Dupont Museum. Increase the water and utility tax rate by 1% for a total rate of 12%. Increase the stormwater utility tax rate by 2% for a total rate of 10%. Establish a new business and occupation tax for existing businesses to supplement but not duplicate our current tax code. The proposal establishes a square footage B&O tax based on 5 cents per square foot of building space. Eliminate one public works maintenance worker position. And these things were all done in order to preserve and protect public safety to the best extent possible. But as I said earlier, there's no way that we can manage around making cuts to our public safety services. So we would also eliminate the service contract with West Pierce Fire and Rescue. We would eliminate 4 firefighter positions, and 3, including the 3 funded by the SAFER grant. We would also eliminate one police officer position. I now call on our interim finance director, Steve, for a summary of Budget B and to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. We'll begin this portion of the public hearing with just a revisit of the city's vision of itself and its mission. Again, the idea of any budget is to support the mission of the city. Moving on. This is a very summarized description of the budget. For 2013, the general fund budget totals $6,623,504. That's an 11% increase over the 2012 revised budget. The 2013 budget, the total city budget is $10,724,000, and the general fund comprises about 53% of that total. And again, as you see, as we go through this, the focus is going to be shifting towards the general fund, where the majority of the issues lie. It's worth remembering that we remain in a very sluggish economy. There are signs in DuPont in some of the revenues, particularly for plan review, things like that have been discussed with council before, where those very preliminary kinds of revenues are increasing, but they have not yet translated into the big projects that we hope will come. And again, this budget is based upon a property tax levy that is capped by the 1%. That is, it does not include the levy lid lift that was defeated at the election. here's a depiction of the overall city, not the general fund, but the overall city, and how the operating expenditures, how the services, the dollars are spent overall. And from this perspective, what's worth particularly noting is that public safety, which is police and fire, comprise about 40% of the overall city, and then the utilities, that's your water and storm water services, are about another almost 25%. The rest of the city services, governance is actually the city council and the city administrator and city clerk and a couple of other positions. Support services is me, the finance staff, and our IT support. We don't not personnel; that's all just equipment and costs. Community development, just planning and similar services. The parks, recreation, and museum facilities are largely an area of the Public Works Department that provides those kinds of services. And the Public Works streets is just the general fund contribution. I'm sorry, that's the total streets in this one. Total amount spent on streets. So that's how the pie, I guess, gets shared. And moving to the next slide to just a description of what the general fund is. And in all cities, municipalities, the way they're funded is through a combination of unrestricted revenues and restricted revenues. That is, dollars that can be used by the council for any priority that they agree to, and some restricted dollars that can't be moved to support those priorities. Good examples here in the general fund would be are your property tax levy and sales tax levies. Other than there's one component of the sales tax that's restricted, but most of your sales tax can be used for anything the council desires. So those dollars go into the general fund where costs can be prioritized. A highly restricted source of revenues is your hotel motel taxes. By law, they have to go to its own fund, and it can only be used for a very restricted list of purposes and can't be shifted to support police operations or fire services, things like that. So the general fund is always, because it's the unrestricted revenues. All unrestricted revenues go in the general fund, and so most of the costs are there as well, and that's really where basic services in any city are funded. And there's the list. This slide depicts the growth in DuPont's population over the last several years. It's not quite as steep as the assessed valuation growth, but that's a very, very significant amount of population growth for any community to absorb and accommodate in that amount of time. Current 2012 number we have from the Office of Financial Management for DuPont's population is 8,640. This slide depicts where the money comes from to support general fund operations. And again, virtually all of the police and fire services are in the general fund. So here's where they come from. Over 32% come from property taxes. That's both the regular and the EMS levy. Another 21% comes from utility taxes. Almost 15% comes from sales and use taxes. 8.5% from charges for services. Another 6.5% from licenses and permits. The business taxes is one worth noting because it's out of sequence, you can see here, because it's bumped up. It's ranked on this list because of where it used to be in relation to the other revenue sources, but now it's grown to 11.2% of the general fund, and a large part of that growth happened with the city switch to the master business license, where the city was able to better get a handle on all of the businesses who actually do business. And the numbers I've been told, these numbers would be consistent with my other experiences elsewhere, it went from about 500 businesses to about 800 businesses. So when you have those tools in place, it has an impact. And the rest of the revenue sources listed here, these top 10, they start falling off very quickly. And just within 10 revenue sources, we've accounted for 99.4% of every dollar that goes to the general fund. This is a breakout with more detail of the actual dollars to be derived from each of these various sources. All taxes, and there's a slide that'll come up next that will break that taxes line into which taxes, so you can see what's property, what's sales, etc. But over $5 million will come from taxes of various kinds. A little over $400,000 from licenses and permits. About $250,000 from intergovernmental revenues of different types. Over almost $550,000 from services, service charges and fees. The reimbursable revenues that we get, it is just as it sounds. It's a revenue. It comes in as a revenue, but it's simply to reimburse us for other costs. So it doesn't gain us any ground. And then the rest, you can see the relatively minor nature of other revenues that the general fund gets. And here's, again, the detail of that $5 million in taxes. 41% of that comes from property and EMS taxes, a little over $2 million. 16%, that's $828,000, comes from sales taxes. This criminal justice component is a somewhat restricted component of the sales tax that we get as a state shared revenue. And it comes in at 2% of the total taxes we receive. And business and excise taxes have grown to be 14% of the total general fund revenue source. And then utility taxes are the other really large one at 27%, or $1.35 million. For a total of, a little over $5 million in revenue sources to support the general fund. So this is where it's proposed to go. The governance component of the general fund, a little over $526,000. Support services, that's all the back office kinds of activities, accounting, payroll, IT, all that stuff, $280,000. Police department is the largest single expenditure at just short of $1.5 million, followed close behind by the fire department at $1,446,000. Community development at $730,000. Parks and recreation at $560,000. The public works streets at $362,000, and then non-departmental, which are things. They're external things. There are a whole range of things that are not controllable by any particular department, like our allocations for Pierce County Jail Services. I don't have the list in front of me, but there are a lot of the Air Pollution Control Authority's assessments. There's a whole range of things like that that the city has to pay that get put into the non-departmental category because they're not under the control of any particular departmental director. These are the dollar impacts of the Budget B proposals delineated. The proposal to reduce irrigation and maintenance of parks accounts for about $11,500 of reductions. Eliminate the True Green contracts for Wilmington Drive and Powder Works is $27,000. Closing the soccer, baseball fields, and restroom facility at Powderworks Park is about $8,000. Dupont Museum, closing that is a little over $25,000. The eliminate of a proposed but not filled public works maintenance worker would produce savings of about $19,000. Eliminate service contract with West Pierce Fire District. That's a almost $105,000 reduction. And then these 4 firefighters positions, I believe, is our 3 from Safer Grant and 1 additional position at $250,000 in reductions. Reduction of 1 police officer at $88,000. And then these last 2 are revenue, the impacts of revenue increases. So there'd be about $33,000 new revenues derived from an increase in the 2 proposed increases in the gross earnings tax on the city's water and stormwater utilities, and then the proposed new business. It's a form of a B&O tax that uses a square footage calculation to impose it. There are some businesses in DuPont that have large impact, but don't do much of their taxable businesses in DuPont. And so this proposal is a way of addressing that impact, or that difference between revenues and service requirements or service costs. And that new tax would produce an estimated $350,000. Move on. See if we're okay now. Again, this is just looking at the general fund alone. We had an earlier pie chart that showed the city overall. This is just that same viewpoint, but only focused on the general fund. And here, I think it's significant that you can see between the police and fire department, they account for just under 50% of the total general fund expenditures. In support services at 5%, governance at 9%, non-departmental, those external costs are at 5%, Parks and Rec 16%, and community development at 13%. And this graph indicates the fluctuations in the city's ending fund balance. The city has a very prudent ending fund balance policy, which is that the goal is that it be 10% of annual budgeted expenditures. And that's a good national standard that's been adopted here. And over the years, there's been a very significant fluctuations in that. But what's key at this point in time is that end point on that graph still meets, not by much, but still meets that 10% standard. Non-general fund revenue projections. These are all of the other activities that we haven't been talking about, which is those restricted dollars that are outside the general fund, and they're lumped together rather than fund by fund. The taxes, there are several restricted taxes. Gas taxes have to go to street fund. The real estate excise tax has to go to its own fund. It actually goes to a capital projects fund. Hotel motel taxes have to go to its own fund. But those are all different tax sources. License and permits in this case is a small dollar amount because it just has to do with some plan review things. The charges, service charges and fees are mainly your utility revenues. And the interfund transfers are mostly transfers from the general fund to other funds and to support the activities, although there's some others in there as well, particularly transfers to the equipment rental fund. And I think that's most of what's of note there. Again, these are activities that are outside the general fund, and these dollars are not available to be moved to fund general fund activities. Non-general fund expenditures, this gives a sense for what the services are provided from those sources. Street operations, that's street maintenance, not street construction. That's sweeping, I think it's street lights, things like that. The water utility, the actual cost of operating that utility. Stormwater utility, almost $600,000 to operate that. Debt service, that's the total. The only debt service the city has currently is the certificates of participation, which is both the principal and interest. I think that's most significant there. These are the ending fund balance projections in dollar terms. The general fund, as I said, is projected to end the year, end 2013, at $627,000, which again is above that 10%, slightly above that 10%, so it's just about 11%. So it's above the 10% goal. The special revenue funds, that's an aggregate number of probably 5 or 6 restricted funds. The utility funds are the retained earnings in the 2 utilities. Equipment replacement fund, that dollar amount there is the accumulation of contributions from all of the various activities of the city. There's the way equipment replacements are normally handled are through assessments against all of the city's activities. They go into a single equipment replacement fund, and then actual replacement equipment is purchased in that manner. Anything else of note, Don? And with that, I think it's appropriate to turn this. Yes.
Councilmember Ehrenreich has a question about the presentation.
Steve, and maybe Don, for the new proposed B&O tax square footage tax there, a lot of times when a city institutes a new tax or a new rate, there's a waiting period before it goes into effect, statutorily or otherwise. For instance, we saw that with the rate reduction on the sales tax that we had this year. Is there something like that on this one? I mean, when could this go into effect once the council passed it?
I believe it would go into effect within the notification period, which is 3 days, I believe, from the passage of the ordinance.
3 days?
Correct.
Okay. So quickly.
Or an effective date could be stated in the ordinance. Sure. And again, that ordinance has to come forward to council in 2 weeks, I think.
Councilmember Quartz.
Yeah, Steve, just one question. I want to make sure I understood one of the charts correctly. And up front, you showed that the 2013 budget proposal was an 11% increase over 2012. And that's even with the reductions.
That is because there's a transfer reflected from the general fund to the capital projects fund in the amount of $770,000 for the debt service payment. So that does increase the general fund up by 11%.
Okay. All right. Additional questions? With that, we'll open the public hearing on the 2013 budget, which is proposed by me and will be considered by the council at several work sessions. So this is a great opportunity for the public to come share their thoughts, their reactions, and the council will listen to that and take that into consideration as they deliberate and actually adopt the budget over the course of the next several months before the end of the year. So with that, I'll open the public hearing at 8:30 p.m. Are there any members of the public who'd like to comment on the proposed 2013 budget only? And just to remind folks to please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Name is Ray Smith, 1448 Palisade Boulevard here in DuPont. Mine is in the form of a question. I noticed the transfer from the general fund to the, I assume for the facilities financing. Do I understand correctly that the utility fund, I'm talking about the water and the storm drain, will be increased, and then this will come into the general fund, which then will be transferred out to our portion of this towards the facilities obligation? And if so, because I'm not that familiar with Washington, is there no nexus required between what is charged in utilities versus how that's spent? In other words, if you charge a certain rate for water, does it have to be spent on the water? If you charge so much for waste or for storm drain, does it have to be spent on storm drain, or is it possible to move that into the general fund and be transferred out? And if so, is that what you're doing? Just a question.
Can you elaborate on that?
I'll try to answer what I think your question was. The water rates and the stormwater rates are increasing this year, and that is due to a rate study that was implemented a few years back. The water utility tax rate and the stormwater utility tax rates are general fund collections. They're not collected in the utility tax funds. They're collected in the general fund and can be spent for general fund purposes. The water rates and the stormwater rates that are being increased, totally separate from any Plan A, Plan B, those do remain within the utility tax funds and are restricted and spent on utility functions.
Additional public comments. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Eric Corp, 1571 Jensen Avenue. Good evening, Mayor, council members, and city staff. The DuPont voters have spoken, and it looks like we all have some work to do to ensure that our fiscal responsibilities are met. While some choose to lay blame as to why we're at this point, I encourage you to take what we have been given and focus on what we can do to make ends meet. I fully expect less landscape maintenance, reduced fire and police staff, increased utility taxes, and possibly reduced hours of operations at City Hall, while at the same time expect more support and ideas from our residents. Leadership is all about taking responsibility, so I ask you to take responsibility for your part in the situation that we find ourselves and do whatever is necessary to make it better. I urge you to consider more tax reform to include a tax on homeowners who use their property for rentals as an investment tool, and to look at the possibility of permanent property tax increase in the future that will support the growth that we have seen in the past 5 years, as well as the growth that is expected in the future. The citizens have spoken and need to step up to the plate. I will take responsibility for my part by offering my talents in whatever way I can to ensure that DuPont stays as a place to live, work, and play because of, and not in spite of, its citizens and leaders. The way I look at it is we now have thousands of citizens who are offering their support to help mow lawns, establish neighborhood watch groups, adopt trails and parks, attend CERT training, and volunteer their time to help our reduced staff. It's time to lead, follow, or get out of the way.
Additional public comments.
Deborah Kerner, and I'm wearing two different hats tonight. One for the hotel. I'm the regional director of the operations for the Liberty Inn, and I'm also a resident of DuPont. And I have to say that we have a hotel that brings in 24,000 to 27,000 people a year. The guest house does the same, and now we've got another hotel coming in. The fire department and the police have been there for us every time we needed them. This is really disappointing to me that this proposition didn't pass. But I know the council's put a lot of hard work into trying to come up with a plan, and the citizens have spoke. And I want to thank all of you for all your hard work. I also have another another thing that's concerning me is the museum being closed. Being on the Dupont Tourism Board, we've all put a lot of work into this, and as a hoteler, our guests like the museum. It's our history of Dupont. I would hate to see that happen. We also have been planning to make that a visitor center, and we need a visitor center here for the hotels. And so anyway, I'd like you to reconsider the closing of the museum, if at all possible, within your plan. And I know you've got your work cut out for you, but thank you for what you've done. And I'm really disappointed because of the fire and the police and our parks and recs. I mean, we push the parks. We push our trails, the hotels do. And our beautiful Dupont. When we build here, a hoteler, when they come into the community, they spend millions of dollars to build here. And we have all these guests that come in, and they walk down our streets. And now what's going to happen? What's going to happen to, if there's an emergency, who's going to help me take care of my guests? Am I going to have to get in a car and drive them to an emergency facility? These are really critical questions, But anyway, thought I'd say my 2 cents.
Thank you. Additional public comments.
Edward Healy, 1871 Ridgeview Drive. Mr. Mayor, I appreciate all the openness you've had with the community. And I haven't had a chance to speak with all of the council members, and I don't know the staff very well, so I apologize that I haven't met you in person. But one of the things I want to encourage you to do through this entire process, and it's going to be a long one, was highlighted by Mr. Kortz's question earlier to the finance director, which was, please try to foresee our questions. This 11% increase, Councilman Kortz rightly saw that somebody in the council, in the chambers here, is going to ask you, if we're in a financial problem, why is the budget going up 11%? And you have that opportunity to explain it. Please take it upon yourselves to explain those things in detail to us as you go along, because they're going to ask the question. And one of the great things about this levy battle on both sides, people took a lot of time to do the math. Whether they defined an increase by a certain amount or a different amount, they at least showed their work. And I think while we know in the past that you guys have done a lot of work for us, one thing that we're going to be asking you to do is to show us your math in some ways, not because we want oversight or anything, but we want to understand what you understand. And I'm less talking to the council people here and more to the staff, because you guys are the ones that kind of are day-to-day here. I don't expect as much knowledge per se, in-depth knowledge. They're going to rely on you to give them some advice, just like the council from years ago relied on our staff to do the COPs. They're going to rely on you to give them that advice and the math that backs up their decisions that they're going to make for the budget. And some examples would be, for instance, the 11% that Councilman Kortz brought up. In the mayor's article before the election, he spoke about if we were to try to refinance this city hall, for instance, it would cost us $1.5 million. But in the budget proposal, he said $2 million, so I questioned about it. And there's a range. I'm just asking you, instead of just saying the number, be specific. If it's a range of 1.5 to 2, state 1.5 to 2 million. And another example, Mr. Mayor, would be, for instance, when your presentation earlier, you said that it is not possible for us to reassess the financing situation, or we looked into it and it was not possible without this problem. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge whether it's not possible or just really hard. And so I'm seeing a yellow light, which I guess means my time is pretty much up. So I'll let you go. But my stress here is that you guys put your, we obviously don't have the time that people like Ms. Mascow and Steve have to put to the numbers, but we can definitely, look at them, and we're going to ask those questions. Please anticipate those questions so that it doesn't, when the sniff test comes, it doesn't smell bad. We can be on your side. We want you guys to succeed. We want you to, to do right by the city. Help us help you.
Lee Chase, 309 Barksdale. First, I'm going to apologize. There hasn't been a financial reporting of Plan B to come out, so I may be asking questions that are, somebody has the answer, but I can't find it anywhere. So, first of all, with the reduction in the fire department, down to 8 firefighters with 3 shifts, it looks like that'll be a 3-3-2. So you're going to have overtime, about 121 24-hour days of overtime to get 3 people to have 2 people being there, given training, given holidays, given vacation time and all of that. Is that cheaper to go that way or to keep 9 firefighters? That's a question I have. I don't know. I haven't seen any numbers, so I can't make that decision. The other question I have is with the utilities, with both stormwater and water. In looking at this year and looking at what I think is the budget, it splits out your public works, your maintenance workers, 2s and 3s. And it gives a percentage of an FTE for each of those positions that are charged to those utilities for their work. The city nicely provides every month the number of hours that you've spent, at least that's the way I read the report, in those various areas. My question would be, are those accurate for the number of hours being reported? And if not, what's going to change for the coming year? I would love to think that the general fund is supporting the utilities, but I'm afraid that I think the utilities may be supporting the general fund, especially when some months we say we only spend 48 hours on stormwater, and the maximum that we spend on stormwater presently is, out of the last 10 months, the most we spent is 85.5 hours in a month. Just a question. That gets back to some of the hard questions that need to be asked. I'm sorry, as I said, to come forward. This isn't usually the way I come forward. You usually know what I'm saying. With that, I'd be anxious to hear I'd be happy to be educated as to whether my beliefs are incorrect or correct, and that would be wonderful. But I just ask you to look at that.
Yeah, thank you. Additional public comments?
I'm Mike Gorski, 1875 Ridgeview Drive. I'd like to make a comment based on an idea of how you might want to proceed. And we show the data up here. We show tax rate comps. And I would like to propose you stop showing comps. They really have no bearing on where DuPont needs to be. All you're doing is comparing ourselves to Fife and Eatonville. And I would challenge you to actually answer, what difference does it make? Because they have a different profile of citizens, businesses, revenue streams. Some have greater sales tax revenues, some have greater housing values. It really doesn't matter. And when we show those comps, I get the feeling that we show them just to kind of accentuate our low tax rate. And then that's going to plant a seed to say, well, if we don't pay enough tax rate, this is why we have these cuts on the table. Not true. Because as the levy effort showed, it's tax rate times valuations. So what Spanaway pays, what Parkland pays, is their business. They have their unique needs for their city limits. So what I would propose for you to do, and it's a little bit harder work, is to define what DuPont needs. Stop looking at your neighbors and figure out what we need and present the citizens what the cost is in a very open and transparent way. And it doesn't matter what Fife needs. It doesn't matter what Tacoma has or Lakewood does. Because if you define what DuPont needs, you will get the citizens of DuPont engaged. And if you can propose what we need based on a cost analysis and their input, you may actually get some success out of the citizens in supporting you. So you may want to consider that in the future as a methodology, because when you show comps and you show us at the low end of that range, it does nothing to get us where we need to be. So you need to take that into consideration. And based on the results of the levy and the percentage basis that you failed on that, you need to start by reconnecting with your citizens and finding out what is important to them and what they are willing to pay. In 2009, a levy failed and you undertook a survey. You paid $25,000. You touted it as being scientific in nature, and you effectively ignored the results for the next 3 to 4 years. So we have spoken, we have voted, both speak volumes. But what we want to do is define what DuPont needs and define the future of DuPont based on the budget that we are willing to pay. And if it means closing some trails or what have you, then that's what the citizens are telling you. Because one thing that's important to realize is, yes, we have grown, but in that growth we have changed. And I'm not sure everyone on council is prepared to face the new DuPont, because I think your comp plans and your other plans and your parks plans are woefully out of date for the population growth that has been experienced since the boom ended and who lives here now. Thank you.
Additional public comments.
Jim Hills, 202 Brandywine. I signed in on the other list. $1,348,000. That's the cost of these two buildings for a year. There's money for everything that the mayor is proposing to cut. What there isn't money for is for these two buildings, $1,348,000. I'm going to come at this from a different point of view, and that is give the buildings back. Default on the loan. That's not a moral judgment. That's a financial decision. There's no moral judgment in any way associated with giving these buildings back. It's possible to rent them from these bondholders who we don't even know, have never seen. Mr. Gorski at one point noted that the administration is choosing to pay for these buildings at the cost of the police department, the fire department, the parks. I'm not in favor of a lot of things. I've never been, and Don Masco knows this, I've never been in favor of as much money as we spend on True Green, but that's one of the things you're now willing to cut. I don't care whether you cut that or not. What needs to happen is there needs to be a default on these two buildings and rent them back. This building can't be used for much other than a city hall, and the one next door can't be used for most of anything except a fire department and a police department. So I would think the bondholders who have never made an appearance in any way would certainly be willing to rent them. I am well in favor of, and I stood on the corner and took some guff from one of the firefighters, I'm well in favor of fire protection, police protection. I am not in favor of cutting those functions. What I'm in favor of, and I don't know, no one else has said this, give the buildings back. Thank you.
Additional public comments. And while he's coming up, if there is another list out there, I was just talking to our city clerk, and folks would like us to follow that. I'm not going to call anyone up, so just feel free. If you signed up on that other list, we're not following it here, so feel free to just come on up as you see fit.
Joe Patoki, 1537 McDonald Avenue. I'm a little dense, and I haven't followed a lot of. I was trying to follow the slides and figure out exactly where the payment on the debt for the buildings occurs. I really couldn't follow that in the slide presentation. I thought at first it was explained that under the general fund it wasn't there, and then I think they mentioned a 1.4 million transfer of general fund money to non-general fund money, and maybe that's where the payment comes from. I'm not sure. And then the other thing is, so I'd like to know where the money comes from that actually makes payment for, I'm guessing it's like a mortgage bond or something. We just owe the debt and it's paid out of somewhere. But I didn't, you know, it doesn't, the slideshow doesn't really present that clear. It's kind of obfuscated. It's hidden somewhere in there, but or I'm just probably not that astute in following it. The other thing would be the gentleman's proposition, is it even possible for DuPont to default? If it defaults, does that require some kind of kickback from, or from a legal aspect where it puts you that you can't borrow money in the future, things of that nature? What situation would that put you in? And there was one other part related to that, but it kind of slipped my mind. It just came up to my, but I couldn't hold on to it because I was going through the other piece. So where does the money come from to make the payment, really? Is it kind of just shuffling money around so we can't see where it comes from? Or is it really should be obvious to me where it comes from? Because I'm sorry, I'm not that smart that I could follow it in the presentation to make a discovery of where it came from. And if we do default, what does that mean to the city? And if you don't default, but you keep everything you have now, but you only pay on to the bondholders what you can pay and still maintain everything else, is there a possibility that they won't press for any kind of foreclosure whatsoever? Because what are they going to do with the property? So I think those are interrelated.
Thank you. Additional comments, questions? Okay, again, if you signed up on that list, I'm not going to call you up. Please feel free to come forward at your leisure. Okay, last call before we close the public hearing at, what time is it? 8:53. Before we go on to the next agenda item, I think it's important, while the public are here asking these questions, that we do our best to follow up. One of the questions that was asked was about the museum being closed and the proposed visitor center. The Historical Society, and unfortunately one of the board members just left, but they've stepped forward and said that they're going to try to work with us to provide revenue to keep that open. And so I know that there are a lot of people stepping forward in different ways, looking to be that difference that they want to see in the community. Obviously, we have tough choices. We have to make cuts in order to preserve that of which we can for the things that are most important in our community and to meet our financial obligations. But the Historical Society and others are stepping forward to offset or mitigate some of the costs of these proposals in this budget. And so that's something that you'll hear going forward in the work session between now and December. The questions about the overtime, Chief, could you speak to that real quick? That was asked by Mr. Chase.
Given a staff of 8, I would staff with 3 shifts of 2 and 2 unassigned hobos. That would eliminate the greater majority of the overtime.
And a hobo is not a homeless person. We're not to that state. Could you talk about what a hobo is?
A hobo is someone who isn't assigned to a shift, and after K-days and vacations are picked, the unassigned hobos then pick the days that they work to alleviate the overtime. It's certainly not the best option in the world, but it is functional.
And this is something that we gave a lot of thought to, and this is where the revenue enhancements came from in some of the other proposals, because to reduce a firefighter position in one more would put us in a very even more dire and costly situation for overtime based on several analysis. So the second question was regarding the utilities and the water, the number of hours reported and the number of hours that utilities actually support in the general fund. Don, I don't know if you want to take that, or Peter. I think that's an important thing to clarify. where do the utilities dollars go, and what's reported and what is and is not a general fund expense?
Yeah, I heard a couple of references that generalize some things. I have taken a look at that, and we are tracking fairly well. Some of the numbers that are in the monthly report reflects a generalization of sick, vacation, training, those types of hours. When those are factored back in, the percentages are fairly close to where the allocations are in the budget. This year is a little bit skewed on the storm response to that, but generally speaking, those numbers are tracking fairly well when those other hours, the training and such, is factored back in. So that is separated in the monthly reports, and we can do better at that.
Not even anything to add?
No, just that the percentages are reviewed on an annual basis as we go into the budget, just to make sure that we are adequately tracking and reflecting what the actual activity for the year before was.
Councilmember Enright.
In fact, the state auditor was here. They actually review to make sure that the funds that go into the utility fund are for, say, water or for storm are in fact spent on those activities. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. A big chunk of the money that goes into those funds and that is spent is, for instance, for contracts so you don't necessarily see those as a percentage of the maintenance workers working. A big chunk of the expenditures is actually goes to contracts for people who don't work for the city. Yeah.
Then the other question that came up, and it was twofold by two different individuals, but where does the money come from? And we've talked about it coming from the general fund, but to elaborate on that for Joe, because I appreciate his question. I think if I hadn't served up here, all those charts and numbers would be a little overwhelming for me too. And so if we could just expand on where the money comes from and talk a little bit more about the transfer, and then I'd ask our attorney to talk about the default impacts. It's something we've had many conversations about.
Sure, and I don't believe, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that the transfers were shown on the general fund expenditures. I think he focused on the operating expenditures, not the total general fund expenditures. And we can update that before we post that on the website to reflect it. There is money that goes from the general fund and is transferred into the capital projects fund to replace the REIT, to real estate excise tax, to make the debt service payment. There's funds that come from the utility funds to pay for the debt service, and there's a small portion that comes from public safety mitigation that comes together. And we could probably put a slide together that shows that all in one place and where the funds come from and how they're paid.
I'd be glad to do that.
I'll answer what I can, Mayor, on the question about the effect of a default. Generally speaking, yes, a default will have a negative and very quick severe impact on the city's credit, ability to borrow funds in the future. It's not uncommon that on a default, vendors of all types will cease supplying goods or services on credit. There are agreements that the city has, for example, on a copier lease, excuse me, or telephone lease with, I guess now CenturyLink, where the leases themselves contain provisions that say the city will be in default on the equipment lease if the city is involved in, declares itself insolvent or is involved in any other default proceedings. So what the dollar amount impact of that is, I can't say, but I can tell you that it will impact the city's ability to borrow money. It'll affect the city's bond and credit rating too, in terms of ability to get capital bonds for other projects in the future.
And with the way that the financing was structured, wouldn't we be forced to take other steps and measures before we could default in order to make those payments?
I'm not sure of the answer to that question, except I do know that defaulting will expose the city to litigation. There's a full faith and credit declaration that the council adopted when it pledged to fund the COPs, and that said that the council committed to fund from non-voter approved debt sufficient amount to pay the COPs each year. And the city, if it defaults on that, it will be in violation of that, and city's bond counsel is probably in a better position to answer this question than I am, but I assume that the city would be exposed to litigation and damages actions in addition to claims for the lost amount of the COP payment. So that's something obviously we can explore further with bond counsel, but I don't think it's as simple as simply declaring a default and then coming back in and leasing the building for less.
Councilmember Ehrenreich.
If I recall, at the town hall meeting, well, actually, you weren't there, but the bond counsel did in fact address that issue and potential impacts and the long-term nature of the impact. So, if folks are interested in seeing that, you might want to go back and review the town hall meeting. I don't remember what day that was, but it's there is a discussion of that specific topic at the town hall meeting.
Councilmember Courts.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, on this same topic, you know, throughout this entire process for 6 months now, the discussion has been centered around the building. And I guess what I'd like to see in a single place, and as Councilmember Ehrenreich has said, it's been covered in various places, but I think for everyone out there and who has an interest in this, I think there are 3 things that bear reviewing. Issuing a general bond with the issue of defeasance to the existing interest payments on the COPs, what the implications and feasibility of that. I know you've said costs us 1.5 to 2 million, exceeds our debt limit. I think we need some very specific language. We need to understand, and if our bond counsel needs to do that, so be it. I think we need to explicitly explore renegotiation. You know, we've talked about $18 million in $5,000 increments for 3,400 potential COP holders that have to unanimously agree. And as Mr. Healy pointed out, there's a difference between impossible and extremely hard. And if it's extremely hard, then if that is what our voters have told us to do, then I think we at least have to lay out, this is the mechanism to do that, this is the implication. And then the third course of action is default. And I think we need more explicit, specific language. I'd like to see a point paper that lays these out as 3 options and what the implications are and feasibility. If they're feasible, we have an obligation to at least seriously consider them. If they're not feasible for whatever courses or reasons, or if they're just flat impossible or illegal, then I'd like to be able to have us agree to just stop talking about it. But until we can see clear, plain language, these topics are going to remain out there, and they will remain the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
And just so folks know, and there'll be more information on this to come, but one of the things that the city has initiated is trying to track down every single individual holder of our certificates of participation. And then we are in the process of, once we identify all of them, we will send them a letter and do everything that we can to contact them to see if they're open to renegotiations and talk about the circumstances that we currently find ourselves in. Because the one reality is the failure of this levy does force a conversation with those individuals. However, the harsh reality is every one of them would have to come forward and say that they would be willing to renegotiate on that set amount. And so we are initiating this process. It is I think the one bright spot or advantage of Proposition 1 failing, and we will leverage that as we reach out to those COP holders, and we'll keep you informed as we hear back from folks. Bob?
One other aspect to this, Mr. Mayor, and that is that to the extent that the council or the public wants the council to have an open conversation about default or insolvency in some of these things, that raises some questions of attorney-client privilege. And to the extent that I or your bond counsel advise you about risks in public, and then the public demands you take that action, you will have laid out the city's exposure potentially in public. And so people should understand that there may be limits to the amount of this conversation that that can or should occur in public. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Next on the agenda is the approval of the consent items. A motion would be in order to approve the consent agenda. Motion's been made by Councilmember Wilcox, second by Councilmember Quartz. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion carries 6-0. Next is discussion items. There are none on the agenda. The next item is the mayor's update, and I'll keep my comments brief because I know we're getting late into the evening. But there's two things I wanted to update folks on. The first is for those of you on the council and for those of you that are in the public and aware of what we're doing to improve performance measurement and accountability. What we've done is we've been working with the state auditor's office, and we're a unique pilot city that has initiated an opportunity. Good night, thanks for coming. Initiated an opportunity to have them come in, evaluate our performance measures, and recommend new performance measures. And so we're going through a process right now with the state auditor's office where our staff have done training. We're now writing and updating new performance measures or updating the old ones. And one of the things that we will do, our goal is to have, once the council adopts the budget and we finalize that budget, is to have performance measures established that will more transparently show the public how money is being spent, and not only that, what the purpose of funds and policies and how we're measuring success. And so it'll make it easier for your next mayor, for your current and next council members, and for the public to participate in these conversations. Because as we talked about, I mean, I really empathize with some of the questions tonight. There's a lot of stuff up here, and if we can simplify the performance measures, define clearly how we're measuring success, and then report back to the public, it'll make provide for an easier opportunity for ongoing public and community conversations, which is very important to me and to all of us, I believe. The next thing is specifically for the council. I had a great meeting with many of the mayors from Pierce County, and we talked about legislative agendas, and I shared some of the issues and topics of interest that we have talked about, but we have not spent any time formally talking about a legislative agenda. And the time for us to do that obviously is now and is near. We're in the middle of our budget process, but I would just encourage you either offline or as a group as you have work sessions to try to make some time to discuss that if you're interested in having a unified legislative agenda to go down to Olympia, not only to represent our needs and the citizens of DuPont, but also to join in partnership with our other Pierce County cities. That'll conclude the mayor's report. Next is the city administrator's report.
I too will be quick, council. Just a reminder that the Holiday Bazaar is this Saturday at Pioneer Middle School. It runs from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's a good fundraiser for our Parks and Rec. They're doing a silent auction this year as well, so it's a chance to come and support our programs and offset the general fund. And then the other thing is the fire department, along with the DuPont Lions, is in the middle of the Coats for Kids drive again. So if you have any new or gently used coats that you'd like to donate, we are collecting them throughout the month of November. Please drop them off at the fire department or contact the fire department, and they will come pick them up for you if you're unable to deliver them yourself. That's all I have.
Thank you. Council reports. Councilmember Wilcox.
Thank you, Mayor. This is almost insignificant in comparison to the issue we were talking about tonight. But the Recreation Department wanted me to tell you that City of DuPont Parks and Recreation is offering a yoga class on the November 12th and 17th, actually 12th through 19th, on a Monday and a Wednesday at the community center. And if you're interested in this yoga class, once again, give Amy Walker a call here at the center. That's on Monday, the 12th and 17th. That's November 12th and December 17th. And then on Wednesdays from November 14th through December 19th. And that is a Parks and Recreation yoga class.
Additional council reports. Next is department reports. You have all the information in your packet. Are there any questions for our department staff on any of the reports provided in the packet? Any comments or things that staff would like to draw council's attention to in those packets specifically? Next is unfinished business. There is none. It'll bring us to new business. The first order is approving the third quarter budget adjustment. This is the second reading. Call on Don Masco for staff briefing.
Thank you, Mayor Graham, members of the council. You have before you for adoption this evening the third quarter budget adjustment. We went through the list at the last meeting. I won't go through that again for the sake of time. Nothing has changed between first and second reading, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Council questions? If not, a motion would be in order. Motion's been made by Councilmember Wilcox, seconded by Councilmember Jordan. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. New business item B, an ordinance setting the regular property tax levy for 2013. This is the first reading. Call on our interim finance director, Steve, for a staff briefing.
I guess for my clarity, being interim here, on readings, Aaron, do you read the ordinance by title, or just explain it? I'm good with that. As discussed in the revenue hearing, this ordinance is necessary in order to levy the annual regular property tax levy. The amount that's being proposed is $1,444,058.84, which represents the maximum levy that would be permitted by the 1% cap, and again, with the additions of new construction and the adjustments. This levy would result in about a $13,000, almost $14,000 increase in the regular property tax levy, plus an additional almost $18,000 coming from new construction and $6,700 coming from adjustments. It produce a 2013 property tax rate of about $1.20 per thousand. Council's options are council can set the levy. Since that's the maximum amount, council would be free to set the levy amount at any rate below that dollar amount. With that, I guess staff's recommendation is that you move this reading to second, move it forward for second reading at the next regular council meeting. Please bear in mind that the property tax ordinance, both this one and the EMS one to follow, we have to have an ordinance to the county assessor by November 30. So we have some time to work with it. Questions?
Council, are there questions for staff? Because this is a first reading, I'd open it up. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on this ordinance specifically? Second reading is scheduled for November 27th. The next item on the agenda is the ordinance setting the EMX tax levy for 2013. Again, this is a first reading. Steve, you're on deck.
Thank you, Mayor. The vote that was taken I don't know, it was last year or the year before, set a emergency medical services levy at 50 cents per thousand. This ordinance would propose to levy an EMS levy at the 50 cents per thousand, which would produce a revenue in 2013 at $587,269, which is about a almost $16,000 decrease from the prior year's levy. And again, that decrease, because the levy is set at a rate in EMS levies, and a maximum rate is 50 cents per thousand, that decrease comes entirely from a decrease in the assessed valuation in the city. I guess since the vote said 50 cents per thousand, I think that's what council's options are. So staff recommends moving this forward to second reading.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Again, we'll open this up to the public if anyone would like to comment specifically on this ordinance. Okay. Second reading is scheduled for November 27th. Next on the agenda is the ordinance amending the DMC, the Dupont Municipal Code, regarding the business and occupation taxes. Again, this is a first reading. Steve, it's your night, buddy.
This ordinance is actually one where the city has no choice. This comes to us by way of the state legislature. The city imposes a business and occupation tax. For all cities that impose a business occupation tax in 2003 or 2004, the state required the city to adopt what's called the model ordinance. And that's to get some uniformity among the 40 cities that impose a B&O tax. The city had one required amendment to that ordinance in 2007. And this is coming forward to us again as a set of required amendments. So the city, as long as the city imposes a business occupation tax, the city does not have an option to not adopt this. It's also because there's been several proposals for new business occupation tax or adjustments to others. This would be necessarily preparatory to doing further work in the city's with the city's business occupation taxes. So the language comes to us in a very prescribed form, and what's in front of you in form of the ordinance simply does what the state legislature has directed us to do. Both there's a set in this amending a section of the code where you have the business occupation tax itself, and then you have another section of the DuPont Municipal Code that has administrative procedures. There's language for both of those things in here, and again, it's all that lengthy verbiage is as it comes to us. So, staff recommends you approve.
Thank you.
And move it to second reading.
Questions from council? Questions from the public? We'll open this up for public comment. Noticing a pattern. Okay, this will be considered at a second reading November 27th. The final ordinance for consideration tonight is an ordinance amending the municipal code regarding wireless communication facilities. Again, this is a first reading, and this is not Steve, this is Bill Kingman. Please provide us with a staff report.
Thank you, Mayor. The city of DuPont has locations in which radio communications do not work. The police department cannot talk with each other, or the base unit, and the fire department cannot talk amongst the units or with the base. This is a long-standing problem in the city of DuPont. This is not new news. What is new is that over the years we've been working with both the city of Tacoma, our radio carrier, and Pierce County regarding alternatives and solutions for this. An antenna always comes into the discussion because that's generally how you eliminate these black holes of no communication. You get the antenna high enough that you get line of sight and everybody's able to talk. The question of allowing police and fire to communicate with each other is something that was brought forward in 9/11. That's why fire was running up the stairs and police were running down. There was a federal mandate to straighten that out. We are still not there. Early this year, Pierce County received 2 grants for communications. The hitch was the enhanced 911 system must be operational by mid-next summer. So Pierce County came to us and said, hey, we've got these 2 grants. This is great stuff. One's a federal grant, one's a port security grant. We've got money, we got a green light, we got an initiative, let's build this. We were very excited about this. As we looked into it, we realized that the DuPont Municipal Code does not allow an antenna in the preferred location on top of Hoffman Hill. We talked about other locations. Those were less suitable, either required a taller antenna or other barriers that were in place. So the preferred location was Hoffman Hill. That necessitated a code amendment to the DuPont Municipal Code. That was submitted by Pierce County, reviewed, went through the public hearing process, and is before you tonight for first reading. The ordinance, in summary, creates a definition for public
wireless communication facilities. Those are different than private carriers, for-profit carriers that we all know and love and carry in our pocket with us. The public definition applies to public entities. The rest of the code amendment talks about where those public wireless communication facilities could be located. Particularly, the proposed amendment talks about all zones in the city. It would allow it in all zones of the city through an administrative permit process. That is the amendment that is before you tonight for first reading. Thank you.
And this is important, as Bill said, both for public safety, for our first responders, and for the citizens that receive those services. And I'd open it up to council for any questions or comments. Councilmember Wilcox.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. We move to the second reading. We've already confirmed this particular situation. And I think the thing is that by June, I think next year, if I may be corrected, it has to be built. Is that correct? By June?
The system throughout Pierce County must be operational by
June, yeah, okay.
Of next year.
I don't want to fool around once again and lose this, because I think the communications is extremely important. So I would make a motion to move this to the second reading tonight.
Is there a second? Second has been made by Councilmember Jordan. Discussion? Councilmember Quartz and Councilmember Ehrenreich.
Yeah, look, at first blush, and having heard the previous presentations on this, I support the idea of putting this up, and it's always good to soap them, spend other people's money. But my question, in the public hearing, Bill, did we get any feedback from the residents who this would directly impact, the people that this antenna is going to go up in their neighborhood?
There was one comment at the planning agency public hearing regarding this. The comment was specific to the design of the antenna. Pierce County is proposing a three-legged steel lattice tower style antenna because it provides more wind resistance during natural events, high wind events when the power goes out and they need that communication, whereas a monopole antenna starts to rack and yaw, and so your line of sight fluctuates and floats. But the three-legged tower is more rigid, and that is one of the requirements, I believe, of the port security grant, is that this tower remain operational during those emergency events. So the resident said, you know, I'm not really warm and fuzzy on a lattice tower antenna. I've seen different designs in other areas. Would you consider that?
Follow up?
Again, this ordinance that's before the council tonight for first reading is not the development permit. It's the code amendment that would allow for a development permit to be submitted.
Okay, and the follow-up to that is, you know, we talked about this when we got the presentation from Pierce County and the federal assets. Has this been vetted through the airspace management authorities at JBLM?
That would be a question for the applicant who is here in the audience tonight. It's awfully quiet. Mr. Ed Munoz of Pierce County Department of Emergency Management is here tonight.
Good evening, Ed Munoz. I'm the radio communication supervisor for Pierce County Department of Emergency Management. We have an FAA letter of determination filed for this structure. So yes, it's been vetted through the I don't remember the name of the organization over at JBLM, but they have to sign off on it before the FAA will give us a letter.
It's the aviation division of the Garrison Command.
Yes.
And then the FAA will have to terp the antenna.
Yes. Okay. And it's been, a letter of determination has been filed.
Okay.
So
I'm satisfied.
Councilmember Ehrenreich.
I think actually the question that I was going to have was answered, so I appreciate that.
Additional council questions, comments during discussion? Councilmember Coffey.
Yes. I would like to direct this question towards the police chief. I've lived here since 1998, and I know that this, the dead spots in communications has been a real problem. There's been times when firefighters have not been toned out. and I remember most recently, wasn't there a kind of a drug deal that went bad, and there was a car chase down I-5, and they ended up in Dupont, and they ended up in the swamp behind the Public Works Department? And how was that communications affected there?
Thank you for the question. Yes, that did occur here several months ago, and we did not have radio communications, which meant we had to try cell phones, which were very marginal, and we had no real meaningful communications in the area. We do most of our work off of portables, which have less output than our mobiles, and once we get out of our cars, frequently we have absolutely no communications, as we had in that area off of Dupont Road between there and Bell Hill.
This is a classic example of the need for this, and I'm glad that Pierce County has been able to secure the funds and resolve the problem that DuPont has dealt with for many years. So I appreciate this, and I agree that this should be moved first and second reading this evening.
Additional discussion, questions, comments? Motion's been made and seconded that this be read on first and second reading. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Now, Attorney, is there anything else that we need to do, or like, do we now need to adopt it, or is that formal adoption? I just want to make sure I don't miss anything.
I didn't hear the motion stated. If the motion was to approve the ordinance and waive second reading, then you're done.
Okay.
Yes. Aaron's saying yes, so.
Perfect. Just want to make sure we're not missing anything. So that brings up the conclusion for our new business. Next is the second opportunity for public comments. Anyone wishing to comment on any issue on or off the agenda, please come forward and keep your remarks to 3 minutes. Okay. Council comments. Councilmember Jordan.
I just want to thank everybody that contributed their opinions and ideas tonight on budgeting. We all take them to heart and will pay a lot of attention to them and really give them a lot of thought. So keep them coming. Thank you.
Additional council comments. Next on the agenda is executive session. There is none. We will adjourn the meeting at 9:28. Thanks for coming.